Have you ever used a vibrator? Do you use one with your partner? I'm Dr. Rina Malik, urologist and pelvic surgeon, and today I'm going to talk all about vibrator use. Why do people use them? Do men like that their partners use them? And how do people incorporate them in their relationships? So in general, when you've looked at the data, about 50 to 80% of women use vibrators. And most often they're using them because they're curious or they want to increase their pleasure. Conversely, only about 42% of heterosexual men are using vibrators. And most often they're using them for their partners to improve foreplay or during intercourse, and primarily to improve their pleasure and help their partner achieve orgasm. Now, this is actually much higher than the rates that we've seen in the early 90s. In a study back then, they found about 1/5 of men between the ages of 18 and 59 actually found the idea of using any sort of sex toy, whether it's a vibrator or dildo, appealing, and only 2% report that they actually purchased something like that in the last 12 months. So generally speaking, I think a lot of people worry that men might feel like they're threatened by their partner's vibrator use. But when looking at the data, about 88% of people found that men were enthusiastic about their partner's use of sex toys, and only 10% really felt negatively about it or unenthusiastic. So one study looked at the perception of women on their vibrator use. So in this study, they took what's called a nationally representative sample. What that means is they use these specialized survey companies that can survey people that match the demographics of the United States population. They surveyed over 2,000 women. In this study, these women were asked all about their use of vibrators as well as non-vibrating dildos in their past month, in the past year, and during their lifetime. They also kind of asked when they were using these vibrators, did they use them with a partner? So they were then broken down into two categories: ever users, meaning they have ever used some sort of sexual toy, and never users, those who have never used them. They also asked a lot of questions: how they got the vibrators, what their level of comfort was, and how their partner felt about it. Women reporting masturbating at least once in the last 4 weeks, it was about half. And there was a really small subset of lesbian and bisexual women, and the majority of them had masturbated in the past month. In terms of using a vibrator, 51% of heterosexual women used it, and the rates of use in lesbian and bisexual women were significantly higher, in the 70 to 79% range. In terms of using a non-vibrating dildo, about a third of women used a dildo for sexual stimulation. Now, how did they get these sex aids? Most often, they purchased it for themselves, so about 61%. The second most common way was they got it from their partner. About 42% of people got it that way. And oddly, 7% got it from a family member. And again, similar to the data that we already knew, the large majority of women used vibrators for fun. About a quarter of them said they didn't have a partner at the time. About a third of them wanted to make it easier for themselves to reach orgasm. A third of them used it to spice up their sex life, and a little over a quarter used it because their partner wanted them to. So in a partnered relationship, only 45 women used it for reasons that were sort of negative. One was because their spouse had been deployed. One was because they had a high sex drive and their partner didn't enjoy having sex with them as frequently as they'd like. They didn't enjoy having sex with their partner, or they didn't feel safe about having sex with their partner, or they were in a sexless marriage. A small subset of women also used it to heal from sexual abuse. And interestingly, there were some that used it because their partner wouldn't have sex with them while they're pregnant. Now, guys, this is completely safe. Having sex during pregnancy is completely safe. There's no reason not to have sex during pregnancy. Now, in terms of using it with a partner, of course, the large majority felt really comfortable using the vibrator alone. About 70% said that they felt comfortable using it with a partner. Now, people who'd never used one had a little less likelihood of feeling comfortable. The vast majority of the group who used vibrators said that their partner knew they used one, about 86%, and the large majority of them actually were positive about their use. Only 6.5% of the entire group of people who were using vibrators, their partners didn't like that they used one. Of those women who didn't tell their partner, most often it was just because they didn't feel like they had to. Now, in general, when looking at validated questionnaires that look at arousal, orgasm, lubrication, they found that vibrator use was actually associated with scoring higher on those sections of desire, arousal, lubrication, and orgasm. And the even bigger thing was that using a vibrator was a significant predictor of sexual satisfaction for heterosexual women, as well as for bisexual women. And interestingly, the relationship was even more so when their partner knew they used a vibrator and they liked that they used a vibrator. So does this mean that women using a vibrator automatically have better sex or have more satisfying sex? No, I think likely it's because these women who are using a vibrator and feel comfortable telling their partner are more likely to feel like, well, their partner accepts them for their pleasure and appreciates their pleasure, and then that makes them feel more intimate and connected with their partner. And they may also feel comfortable enough to actually talk about things like their other interests or fantasies or what they want to do during partnered sex, whether it's bringing a vibrator into the bedroom or not. Now, you may be wondering, well, that's the female's perspective. What about the male's perspective? When I bring up the use of vibrator toys in the bedroom, a lot of my patients get a little nervous. I think it's important to talk about this because it can really enhance your sex life. Another study that I looked at was done to look at primarily the man's perception of the vibrator use on their pleasure as well as their partner's pleasure and satisfaction with sex. Now, this study is a little bit unique because it recruited couples at a sex show. So these people are probably interested in sex, more ambitious, more adventurous. So take this with a grain of salt. In this study, the people who were recruited had to be in a heterosexual relationship for at least a month and be willing to try a very specific vibrator. Now, they got a special type of vibrator that was C-shaped, and basically it was worn during penetrative intercourse. So it was placed on the female with one part of the C in the vagina, but it still allowed penetration. And so you could feel vibrations both externally for the female and internally, and for the male as well. And the big selling point, they said, was it's hands-free, right? You don't need to be doing anything with your hands because the vibrator does all the work, and you don't need to actually be playing with the vibrator, moving the vibrator. It sort of does everything for you. These couples were then asked to have penetrative intercourse 3 times like normal, and then they were asked to use the vibrator 6 times. And women were also asked to masturbate with the sex toy 6 times to become more familiar with the device. Overall, they had about 49 couples who completed the questionnaires and participated in the study. So the average age of these men was about 40 years old, and the majority were heterosexual and Caucasian. All of them were in a serious committed relationship with just one person, and the length of time they were with that partner was about 10 years. And these people were generally having almost 10 episodes of sex over the course of 4 weeks. So when looking at how men felt about it, they said, overall, this was really a great addition to their already satisfying sexual experiences. So these are people who already had really great sexual experiences, and they found that using the vibrator brought additional pleasure. 14%, however, said it didn't really add any pleasure, and 3% were like, I don't want to use this after the study's done. So when they interviewed these people, they found generally 4 themes. One was how it felt for physical pleasure, how they began to appreciate their partner's pleasure, how it added novelty and variety, and lastly, intimacy. In terms of physical pleasure, it allowed for new sensations that generally felt good. They had more intense and more high intensity orgasms, and they liked that they were hand-free. While some small subset of men, on the other hand, didn't really like the vibrating sensations and felt that they were too strong. And some of them actually thought the device was too big to then also incorporate their penis during sex, which then resulted in some chafing. In terms of appreciating their partner's pleasure, the large majority really liked that it increased the sexual pleasure of their partner. And because their partner was having a more pleasurable time, that also improved their experience of pleasure. In terms of novelty and variety, it's pretty self-explanatory. Having this vibrator was kind of a more fun sexual experience. It was sort of new and exciting, and even added sort of a variety of anticipation, like, oh, I'm excited for this. This is going to be something new, something that I've never done before. And lastly, it also caused increased intimacy. They liked that they could share this experience with their partner. Some of them even liked that they could try and simultaneously orgasm with their partner, which is not very common. Just to let you know, this is not something that's common. Even though we see it a lot in the media, it's very unlikely likely that you and your partner are going to orgasm at the same exact moment at the same exact time. It's not like an on and off switch. Now, again, as I mentioned before, this study is kind of, to be taken with a grain of salt. This is probably people who are more sex positive because they're attending a sex toy conference, right? And a lot of these people who were in the study already used sex toys at home. And these couples were together for a really long time and were generally very satisfied in their relationships. What do you take away from this? Well, I think ultimately, if you're open to it, adding a vibrator either for yourself or with your partner can be an extremely rewarding and beneficial experience. We know that for women, it increases their arousal, their desire, their orgasm rate, all sorts of things that can be improving for their pleasure. But now we also see, at least in a small subset of people, that it can be really enhancing to your sex life, and it can add novelty, and it can be a nice addition to spice things up in the bedroom. Okay guys, if you're enjoying my content, please be sure to subscribe and share this channel with your friends. It is super important that people have access to quality educational information about their health. And in particular, these issues that I talk about, urologic health, bladder health, sexual health, are super important and super intimate. People very often suffer in silence. So please share my channel because we want to get this information out there to as many people as possible. And if you're looking for an appointment, make sure to check out my website at www.ritamalikmd.com/appointments. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you check out my one from last week talking about sexual desire mismatch, or what to do when you want sex and your partner doesn't all the time. As always, remember to take care of yourself because you're worth it.